Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. It's time for another garden tour today. It is technically the last day of June, but I'm going to go ahead and call this the early July garden tour because it's almost July, and I know by the time you guys see this it actually will be early July. So we're going to start over here in the main garden. We're going to just take a look at what's going on in the garden. There's a lot that's going right. There's also some that's going wrong, but we're going to take a look. I'm going to show you how everything's doing over here in this main garden, and then when we finish up here, we're going to go head across the yard to look at the new garden expansion. So if you missed my last video, just to catch you up, I broke my toe a few days ago, almost a week ago now. So I have a nice secure walking boot, so my toe will be fine to do this garden tour. But if we're hobbling around a little bit, if I look a little unsteady through parts of this garden tour, that's why. So I just figured I would catch you guys up on that. So I really am enjoying having the garden beds lined with alyssum. I think that just makes a great ground cover. It's really beautiful. So I'm definitely going to do that every year, I think. So sweet alyssum like this makes a great plant to kind of fit in around your main vegetable crops. It grows and spreads out and provides a great ground cover, which helps suppress weeds a lot. It also has, the way its root system develops, it kind of grows around the roots of other plants that are near it. So rather than competing with them, it just sort of fills in the gaps and surrounds them. So overall, it just is, I really highly recommend it as basically a companion plant in your garden. Now I did choose sweet alyssum to grow specifically along the edges of the bed here. As you can see, I have my cucumber plants over here, and I wanted something that was going to kind of mulch these bare areas here. Cucumber plants really are sensitive to soil moisture. They don't like to dry out. So it is really important to keep the roots of your cucumber plant moist if you can. And the way I have my cucumber plants growing on the edge of the bed, that's an area that would be likely to dry out pretty easily. So by planting the alyssum along the edge, that helps hold in the moisture that the cucumbers need. And it also, as I said before, does prevent weed growth. These flowers attract lots of beneficial insects. And because of the way alyssum grows, it doesn't need a big soil space to be happy. So it can just kind of spread out in the little spaces along the edge, provides a mulch for my cucumbers, and it's just all around a great plant. So as you can see here, I did a mix of the purple and the white varieties. That's just for aesthetics. I think it looks really pretty that way. As you can see, I mixed some nasturtiums in as well, and I've got some chamomile growing on the edge here. I've been harvesting quite a bit of that chamomile. And while we're in this section, the cucumbers are settling in nicely. I know you've probably been following my cucumber saga. So I ended up starting these in pots and transplanting them out here, even though I do prefer to direct sow my cucumbers. Because of whatever pest was eating my cucumber seedlings, I found that I couldn't really get them off to a good start direct sowing them. So I ended up starting them in pots on my deck and transplanting them out. Cucumbers in general don't really like to have their roots messed with. They prefer to be direct sown, which is why I originally tried to direct sow them. But they also don't prefer to have their tops eaten as soon as they sprout. So the better option in my situation was to start them in pots and then transplant them out. So after a little bit of sulking, they're now starting to settle in and be happy in their new home. Now behind the cucumbers over here is my broccoli bed. That's not doing a whole lot right now because I have harvested the majority of the broccoli heads. As you can see, there is one broccoli head here that is overdue to be harvested. So that should have been harvested right around the time that I ended up breaking my toe. So with everything that happened, I kind of lost track of it. So I actually do need to come out here and get that. It's probably right now right on the edge of harvestable. If I go too much longer, it's going to start to flower and get bitter and not be that good. So probably right after this video, I think I'm going to come out and harvest that. So ideally, I would have harvested it before this. You can see how the bud clusters are starting to loosen up, and here and there you can see a tiny hint of yellow. So ideally, you want to harvest your broccoli before it gets to this stage, but this will still be edible. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave the broccoli covered in its netting because, as I said, there isn't all that much there to see right now. So once I harvest that last broccoli head there, I am going to go ahead and fertilize this whole bed with some liquid fish emulsion fertilizer. That is a fast-acting fertilizer as opposed to a slow-release fertilizer, so it'll really give those broccoli plants just a little shot of nutrients right away. And the broccoli that I am growing is called Eastern Magic. That is a type that produces side shoots. So basically what that means is now that I've harvested the main heads, the broccoli will just take a little bit to regroup, and then it's going to start it's going to continue on its quest to produce viable broccoli seeds for the next generation. And by doing that, it's going to make little side shoots. Basically, it's going to produce like a succession of mini broccoli heads. So by fertilizing it, I'm going to basically maximize the side shoots that I'm able to get. Hopefully still be able to get a decent harvest, a decent second harvest of broccoli off these plants. So I'll keep them in for a few more weeks just to keep getting those side shoots. So across the walkway here, you can see I have more alyssum and nasturtium growing on the edges. And I've got some cucumbers just starting to climb up the trellis behind it. So as I said, these are just kind of settling in, but I'm hoping it won't be too long before the cucumbers on both sides climb up this trellis and basically cover the whole trellis. So moving behind the cucumbers, you can see the zucchinis are starting to really take off. Got nice big leaves, and it seems like a lot of these plants, like zucchinis, cucumbers, start off small, grow so slowly for a while, and then all at once they just seem to take off. So not flowering yet. I can see little bits of flowers, probably just barely starting down in there. And then behind, on the fence here, or on this trellis here, you can see I've got some cucumbers over there. I just transplanted those out as well. These are all silver slicer cucumbers that are going to grow up this fence here and hopefully give me a really delicious harvest. So I just tried the silver slicer cucumber for the first time last year, and it really impressed me. It grew really well, it yielded really well, it was delicious, and they're a lot slower to get bitter than a lot of other cucumbers that I've tried. You know, especially if you live in a warmer area than me, but even here in Connecticut, when it gets really hot, a lot of times cucumbers will start to get bitter, or if there's a lack of water, they'll also start to get bitter. And I found that the silver slicer was really a lot more resistant to that bitterness than a lot of my other cucumber varieties. So I really did enjoy it. Plus it's a beautiful creamy white color. So that just makes a really nice contrast when you grow that white cucumber and mix it in with the classic green cucumber. Just a really nice variety. So I'm growing 4 plants of that along this trellis here. Hopefully those will catch up and take off really soon. Now off the top of my head, I can't remember for sure which zucchini varieties these are. I think that this big one here is a Cocazelle, which is a beautiful, delicious striped zucchini. I cannot remember off the top of my head which one this is. I did do a video where we planted these seeds together. I can go ahead and link that, but I do need to look up what varieties these are. And then kind of mix in with these zucchinis. You can see I've got nasturtiums. These have giant leaves. I've got some dill, some zinnias that something's been nibbling on a little bit. So those will just provide some interest and color to this garden. Now as we head on along the back of the zucchini patch, you can see the tomatoes from the other side are kind of encroaching on the space and coming through the fence a little bit. So let's go around and take a closer look at those. Now on this back of the bed, I have 3 tomato plants. I know with the amount of stems going on in there, it looks like more, but those tomato plants have been crazy this year. Now with all the craziness in life, and especially with breaking my toe, I had kind of neglected my garden for a few days there. I'd kind of let the tomato plants, and you know, tomato plants, if you neglect them at all, they'll seize that opportunity and they'll go crazy in a very short amount of time. So my tomato plants had, you know, they had done that. They'd started to go crazy. So I did come out here yesterday and tried to tame them as much as I could. I tied them up, I pruned off a lot of the suckers and lower leaves. They are still kind of crazy. I mean, I couldn't completely control them, but I did try to rein them in a little bit. So you can see that they are, for the most part, upright and trellised, and I am hoping that that will pay off and we'll get some really delicious tomatoes. Probably, I want to say soon. It's going to be longer than I want it to be, but hopefully it won't be too long. So down here in front of the tomatoes, I've got another zucchini here. This one is a little bit smaller. I'm not sure if that's the variety or if it's the fact that it's getting shaded out by these giant tomato plants. It could possibly be a little bit of both, but we're going to keep an eye on that and see how it does. Now over here, I've got a handful of bush bean plants. These will give us some nice purple beans, and they are trying to vine a little bit, even though they are technically a bush variety. Now, as we continue on over here, there's yet another zucchini plant. So I've got 4 varieties. I've got 2 growing on this side of the bed, and then We already looked at the other two on the other side of the bed. I know you can't really see them through all those tomatoes. But I think they're looking really good. So we're going to keep an eye on these and see how they do. And here you can get another look at those cucumbers from the other side there. And so here you can see that my pole beans are finally starting to take off. I love growing pole beans on an arched trellis like this. I have pole beans on both sides of the trellis. I'll show you the other side in just a minute. And I love when they just grow up and create a canopy of green beans. It just looks really magical as the summer goes on. So this variety that I have here is called Vortex. This, I'm not 100% sure what my favorite variety is, but this is certainly one of my two favorite varieties. This is kind of a classic rounded long green bean, and they stay tender a lot longer than a lot of other pole beans do, so I really enjoy them. So you can see that they're really starting to climb up this trellis. Now you'll notice with pole beans, they don't put out tendrils the way cucumbers do when they climb. They just kind of wrap their stems around whatever you give them to climb and go up. The stems, if you feel them, are a little bit, they feel kind of grippy, and they'll just grab right onto the pole. So pole beans are natural climbers, which makes them pretty easy to grow as long as you give them something to climb. Then you can see at the ends of the beds, I have alyssum over here too, and also some nasturtiums. I really love this variegated nasturtium. It's so pretty. So this is the Alaska red nasturtium, and it's supposed to have a nice, deep, rich red flower. So I think once it blooms, it'll be even more beautiful, but it's already really pretty just with those variegated leaves. And you can see I've got another one down there. Now these alyssum are a little bit behind the purple alyssum that I showed you by the cucumbers. I planted them a little bit later, probably a couple weeks later, so I'm hoping that they still catch up, but even the small size they are now looks really pretty. So on this side of the trellis here, these are rattlesnake beans. You can see the same thing, they're just wrapping around the pole and climbing up. Now these beans are a slightly more flattened green bean with purple streaks. They're really pretty. So the downside of growing purple beans is that they don't keep that beautiful purple color when you cook them. They just turn into a deep green. And so it's the same with the rattlesnake pole beans. The purple streaks don't stay if you cook them. They just sort of fade to green. I do a lot of times when I'm cooking purple beans, I will slightly undercook them because I want to keep a little bit of that purple color. Or you could just even chop them up and put them in a salad raw. Right. Now as we move behind the rattlesnake beans, you can see I've got my peppers here. And then on the back of the bed, I've got the tomatoes growing up the trellis. So let's take a look at the peppers first. So my pepper plants are a little on the smaller side. I am definitely hoping that they'll catch up. This one here seems to be doing really well. Let me see what this is. I think that's an Anaheim pepper. So this one seems to be doing well. The others are a little bit behind, but peppers really like heat. They really need a lot of heat and even pretty warm nights to really be able to thrive. They're more sensitive to cool weather than even tomatoes are. And our summer has been really slow to warm up. It is getting pretty warm now, but up until, the past week or so, it has been really cool here for summer. So I'm not really surprised that my peppers are a little bit behind, but I'm hoping now that it is warming up and the nights are getting pretty warm, I'm hoping these peppers will catch up. I do have some peppers on my deck, which seem to be doing a little bit better. Now, peppers, for me, historically do better in pots than they do in the ground, but I don't have enough space. I don't have enough pots or enough space on my deck to grow all the peppers that I want to grow, and I'm able to fit a lot more by putting some in the garden here. So I'm kind of trying to play around with it and figuring out the key to growing peppers in the ground as well as in pots. Okay, so we're going to go around to the back of the bed and take a better look at these tomatoes here. But as you can see, these are freshly trellised, just like the other tomatoes that I showed you. And in here, I'm starting to get some decent sized green tomatoes. Now, I know it'll be a while till I have any good slicer tomatoes actually ready. Okay, so here over to the back of the tomato trellis. You can get another look at those tomatoes. And then I am experimenting this year with growing some zucchinis behind the tomatoes to kind of shade out this ground. I'm not sure how well it's going to work because the tomatoes do produce quite a bit of shade. So I'm not sure if the zucchinis will get enough sun. This specific zucchini here, I am actually really surprised it's doing this well. So over in the main zucchini bed, I showed you that really big zucchini in the front that I said I think it's a Cocozelle zucchini. I actually originally planted 3 seeds right there in case one didn't germinate. I do like to grow, when I grow zucchinis, I usually try to grow 2 plants kind of as one because that ensures better pollination. But 3 plants in that space is really too much, and they'll compete for nutrients and space too much. So of course all 3 seeds germinated. So I didn't even carefully transplant that. I just pulled it out of the ground and stuck it over here, and I didn't even water it. I was kind of in the middle of something else, and I was like, well, this plant was going to die anyway. If I pull it out, I might as well throw it in the ground and see what happens. And zucchinis really do not like their roots disturbed, so I really had no hope that this plant would actually do anything, but it actually looks like it's settling in. I don't anticipate that it will be as successful as my other zucchinis since it did have to deal with that transplant shock, but I figured giving it a try was better than just throwing it out. So here, some more tomatoes that you can see starting. This one is a pineapple slicer tomato, which I'm really excited about because I have heard that they are incredibly delicious. And I can't wait to try them. Over here, this is a Cindy's West Virginia tomato, which was recommended to me by a friend. So I've never grown this tomato before, the Cindy's West Virginia. I don't really know that much about it aside from what my friend told me, but I decided to give it a try because it was highly recommended. Now, I did have to buy a started plant of this because it's really challenging to find seeds. I guess it's not a very well-known variety. It is an heirloom though, which means that as long as I prevent cross-pollination, any seeds that I save from this plant will produce the same plant. So what I'm going to do, tomatoes don't cross-pollinate really easily anyway, but it does happen occasionally. So if I have a plant that I want to make sure that I save pure seed from that I know is not cross-pollinated, what I'll do is I'll take a little gauze baggie and bag up one of the blossoms before it opens. Tomatoes are self-pollinating and pollinate really easily, so I don't have to worry about it not getting pollinated if I do that. I might come out and kind of flick the bag a couple times just to help it pollinate while the flowers open. And then I'm going to mark which blossom that I did that to so that I know which one is pure, and then I can save seeds from the tomato that develops from that specific blossom. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. That way, in case I really end up liking this variety, I will have access to my own seeds and I won't have to worry about finding seeds anywhere. Now, not that there's anything wrong with going out and buying a transplant from a local nursery. I do like to do that sometimes, but I always like to have control of my own sourcing whenever I can. So for example, there's only one nursery that I know of that carries this plant. If I end up really liking it and say that nursery goes out of business or they change their stock and don't carry that plant anymore, I don't want to have to go hunting for seeds. I want to have my own seed stock definitely available. So I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I haven't tried the tomato yet, so I don't even know if I'm going to like it, but it won't hurt to have the seeds. So I'm going to give that a try. Now back here is my lettuce bed. This is kind of on its way out. There is quite a bit of lettuce still, but as you can see, it's starting to bolt. See how this butter crunch lettuce is sending up a center stalk here? That means it's getting ready to switch to seed production. At that point, the leaves are going to get a little bit bitter tasting. They have gotten slightly bitter already. They're still sweet enough that we can eat them, but the taste is definitely changing. As you can see, here's another one. You can see the center stalk there. Now this plant over here is really heavily bolted. So once your lettuce plant goes to flower, it's going to look like this. This lettuce plant was actually from last fall. It overwintered. I got some nice early harvest from this. And now it's going to seed. I expected this one to go to seed really early since it overwintered. So I am actually going to try to collect the seeds from this plant. So when you get a specific plant like this that does really well in your specific growing conditions, so for example, this plant overwintered in my Connecticut winter, it gave me a great early harvest this spring. These are genetics that I want to preserve. Now I grew other lettuce of the same variety, but this is the one that overwintered, which means this one is the most acclimated to my growing conditions. So I'm going to save seeds from this specific plant and try to propagate them to make sure that I keep these genetics in my garden. Now, because I knew that my lettuce, their time was numbered, I planted some butternut squash seeds randomly throughout this bed. I've got, there's another little one back there. I'm not sure if you can even see it that well, but I think I've got maybe 6 or 7 plants growing throughout this bed. So I'm hoping that growing that will make the best use of this space that's going to be vacated by the lettuce soon. And that way I'll still be using this garden space. I'll still be getting a harvest. So I'm hoping, I think that there should be enough time for me to get a harvest from that butternut squash. If not, I can always harvest it a little bit immature and it just won't be able to store. But I think that it'll be enough time. So I'm just going to grow that. We'll keep an eye on it and we'll just monitor it throughout the season and hopefully get a harvest. Now, if I hadn't put any seeds in there, I'd be guaranteed no harvest. So it's definitely something that's worth trying in my opinion. Now on the end of the lettuce bed, you can see I've got more pole beans climbing up. These are more, I think these are the rattlesnake beans. You know, I can't remember for sure if these are rattlesnake or vortex. But I've got those growing. And then on the other side of the bed, I've got these purple pole beans. So again, this will be another trellis that I'm looking forward to being covered with delicious pole beans. Now over here is my other brassica bed, which things have gone terribly wrong in here. I'm not even really sure exactly what happened. My one cauliflower plant looks okay. I'm just going to keep the cover on this because it's not really worth showing. But you can see a lot of my kale plants have kind of collapsed, and I really don't know what's going on with them. So I don't think it's from pests. You can see down in there, some of my kale plants haven't done very well. The lacinato kale still seems to be doing pretty well. And for example, this dazzling blue still seems to be doing well. My cabbages look okay. So the good news when it comes to brassicas, like all my kale and cabbages here, is that those are both spring and fall crops, which means that even though this kale was not really, for the most part, all that successful, I will get some harvest from it, but not as much as I would really like. But the fact that it can grow in cold weather means that I'll get another try at this. I can go ahead and rip those dead plants out, and I can replace them with new kale plants that should grow for me in the fall. And honestly, we eat a lot more kale in the fall and winter anyway. This time of year, there's lots of other things that we'd prefer to eat. And kale usually does taste a little better when it's grown in cooler weather. So for the most part, if I harvest summer kale, what I end up doing is either turning it into kale powder, or else I'll freeze it and then I can kind of crumble it into soups over the winter. So I'm probably going to go ahead and rip out, I'll keep the kale that looks healthy, and then I'll probably rip out the rest of it and try to get some new kale for fall planted in that bed, hopefully pretty soon. Now in this back corner bed here, you can see that I've got some little lettuce seedlings here. This is my attempt to get some summer lettuce harvest. Now you could see that the other lettuce I showed you is pretty much done. This lettuce is just getting started, so I'm hoping it won't be long before we can get a harvest from that. So you can see my dill is just starting to go to flower here. I think these are so pretty when they bloom. Now, unfortunately, the timing isn't working out well. One of the main reasons that I grow dill is so that I can make dill pickles. Now, of course, the dill is ready long before my cucumbers are. So I'm hoping that we will get some more flower heads from my dill when my cucumbers are actually ready. The cucumbers are a little behind this year, so the dill is actually probably about where it should be. So we'll see if we're able to get some more dill to make pickles with. And again, through here, there's some more chamomile. I've been harvesting quite a bit from this plant, but you can see there's more flowers coming. And there's a little bit of lettuce there mixed in with the chamomile leaves. And over here, you can see my wild cherry tomato jungle. I told you guys that I came out here and tried to corral my tomato plants. I did not touch the cherry tomatoes yet, though. So my cherry tomatoes have definitely grown wild and out of control, as you can see behind me. Now, when I grow cherry tomatoes, I don't prune them the same way that I prune my large slicer tomatoes. I pretty much just let all the suckers grow and let the plants kind of turn into just a wild bush. But I do still like to prune off the lower leaves to try to prevent disease, and I do need to come out here and do that with these plants because, as you can see, they've grown wild. They're all tangled up and crazy. So I mentioned that I don't usually prune suckers off my cherry tomato plants, but a couple of these larger ones like this one here, I might actually come out and clip and try to root so that I can start new tomato plants, and that will basically give me a second harvest of tomatoes when this harvest is starting to wind down a little bit. So look at this magnificent cluster of tomato blossoms. That's going to be so many delicious cherry tomatoes. So I can't wait for these. This variety is called Red Centiflor, and it is apparently very abundant yielding. So down here is an older cluster from the same plant. You can see it's got some flowers, but it's got a lot of tomatoes on it too. So this is a red tomato variety. I'm excited to try that. And there you can see more cherry tomatoes. And basically in this jungle here, you can see some of my peas have come over to meet the tomatoes, making it even more crazy in here. Through here, I actually probably do need to prune these a little bit. I see another really big tomato cluster over here. This is Barry's Crazy Cherry, which is another high-yielding tomato, so I'm excited to get those. And look back there, there's another huge cluster too. And as you can see, there's a bunch of my snap peas kind of mixing in. Now cherry tomatoes in general, are one of my favorite summer fruits, definitely my favorite fruit to grow in the garden. They're so good and so delicious, and there's so many ways to use them. I love that cherry tomatoes just produce so abundantly, And I actually have a handful of new cherry tomato varieties that I'm trying this year, so I'm really excited about those. The two that I mentioned, the Berry's Crazy Cherry and the Red Centiflora, are both new to me. Additionally, I'm also trying Rosella, which is a nice smoky purple one, and that one's new to me too, so I'm excited to try those. And I have some old classic favorites. I've got Sun Gold, I've got Black Cherry, Matt's Wild Cherry. Those are all classics that I know always do well for me, so I think it's fun to always try some of your old classic favorites and then mix in a few new ones too. So here's my garlic patch. You can see all the scapes have been harvested. The garlic is starting to die down and brown on the edges. Now it's actually almost time to harvest these. You can see I think I've got about 3 leaves that are completely brown, maybe 4 that are almost brown. And that's about the time to harvest garlic. So I'll be coming out to do that probably within the next week or so. I'll definitely bring you guys along for that, and we'll see how the garlic harvest is. Now across the aisle over here, we've got another pepper/tomato bed. In the front here you can see all my peppers. They again are a little smaller than ideal, but I'm hoping that they'll catch up. So the plants are pretty small, but they're actually starting to put on some fruit. So we've got quite a big variety of peppers that I'm growing here. I've never been all that successful with growing bell peppers. I'm experimenting this year with growing some more varieties of sweet peppers that are not bells. So I have some Corbaci peppers, I have some Corno de Toro peppers. I got both the yellow and the red variety, so I'm really excited for those. I do also have some bell peppers as well. And I also decided to grow the Anaheim pepper, which I know is technically considered a spicy pepper, but a lot of people use it as a bell pepper substitute. So I'm trying a lot of that, in addition to a lot of my tried and true favorites like jalapenos and shishitos and peppers like that. So I'm hoping that I will be able to get a good sweet pepper yield by growing some of the different shapes, which are still supposed to be really delicious. Corno de Toro is really highly recommended. I think it's an Italian heirloom. And as I said, it comes in both red and yellow, so I have both types. So I'll keep you updated on how those do, but a lot of people say that they get better yield from those than they do from bell peppers. So this right here is actually a Corno de Toro. Obviously, it's got a ways to go before maturity, but you can see it's sort of long and skinny and pointed, and this should turn red and sweet like a bell pepper. Now behind the peppers there, you can see I once again have a wall of tomatoes. So you can see I am getting a fair amount of green slicer tomatoes developing, but it's going to be a long time before they're actually ready to eat. Now again over here, I'm experimenting with zucchini behind my tomatoes. These seem to be doing much better. Now I did plant these sooner, so I'm guessing that is probably the biggest difference. These zucchinis, I think, were planted about 2 weeks ahead of the zucchinis behind my other tomato bed, and they look a lot bigger. They're also different varieties, so that could have something to do with it as well. Now, I did mention earlier about taking suckers and rooting them. So yesterday when I came out here and worked on these tomatoes, I took suckers from a couple of the plants that I really like, and I just stuck them in these little pots of wet soil. Now you can see they're sulking. They're not super happy yet. I mean, they don't have roots, so they're only drawing up water through their stem. But most likely what will happen is these will grow roots off their stem and become full-size tomato plants. And assuming that that is successful, that is kind of a fun little way to get a little extra tomato harvest. Just get a little boost by, you're basically cloning your existing tomato plants. And then that way I can get tomatoes probably a couple weeks later in the year. By the time these original plants have kind of slowed down, those new plants should be producing. So we'll see what happens. You can also clip the suckers and stick them in a jar of water. I have some going that way in my deck too, but I wanted to kind of experiment. So I put some in the little pot of soil and some in water on my deck. So we're going to head over to the side yard garden, but before we go, I just wanted to give you guys a look at these peas. Now these are probably actually going to be winding down fairly soon because they don't really like heat, but we have been getting a huge harvest off these pea plants here. I mean, you can see through here, there's so many peas mixed in. Even with harvesting a big bowl of peas almost every night, we're still getting more. You can see over here where they've climbed over the fence and decided to join my tomatoes. Got lots of peas mixed in there too. So over here, the side yard garden, is for the most part looking pretty good. Of course, it's got some struggles just like everything else. Now through here, my tomatoes, now, you know, we've already talked about how tomatoes go crazy if given even the smallest opportunity, and this one is definitely taking advantage. Now, granted, I do have these just trellised in tomato cages, which is not the ideal support for tomatoes. Tomato cages don't really provide as much support as full-size indeterminate tomato plants really need, but as I've mentioned before, I'm just doing this in a pinch, and it'll be good enough for 1 year. So I've got these 4 tomato plants here, just 4, but they're doing their best to turn into a little tomato jungle all on their own. So when I went on my big tomato taming spree the other day, I did do a little bit with these tomato plants, but I kind of ran out of time. So these are not fully done. I still kind of have to tackle this tomato bed over here. So as you can see, they're a little wild. Honestly, they're going to be a little wild even when I'm done with them. But I'm hoping we'll still get a good yield anyway. So this tomato, as you can see, is truly sprawling, and I think it's untamable at this point. I'm just going to let it sprawl into the path, and we're just going to hope for the best. I think that these tomato fruits will probably still be okay sprawling. Since they're sprawling onto the path and not onto soil, I think that they'll probably be okay. But this tomato plant is just exceptionally crazy. This one here, and then down in here, you can see various tomatoes developing, so I'm excited for those. So over here, these sweet potatoes are starting to take off a little more. If all goes well, this entire bed will be covered with sweet potatoes, and they'll be draping out into the walkways by the end of summer. And hopefully we'll get a good harvest from those. Now you can see I have some other plants in here too. I've got some snapdragons, some cosmos, marigolds, and then along the edge there's some nasturtiums, just to kind of give this bed a little bit of visual interest. My hope is that the sweet potatoes will sprawl and take up all the ground space, but then these plants will be upright and just provide some nice contrast and beauty to this sweet potato bed. And then back behind the sweet potato bed, I've got my regular potatoes. Those are still nice and big and green. You can see they're starting to look a little worse for the wear. So I'm definitely not a potato growing expert, but I think at this point in the season, I think it's probably actually pretty normal for my potatoes to be looking just a little bit ragged on the edges. Now I planted these, I want to say mid-April. I don't know for sure. So they've been in the ground about 2.5 months, and you know, I don't know what variety of potatoes these are since I started them from purchased potatoes meant for eating. I didn't buy them as seed potatoes. So because of that, I don't know for sure what variety they are, and I can only guess about the maturity date of these. But some tomatoes you can actually harvest in July if you start them in April. So I have no idea what variety these are. But the fact that they're starting to yellow a little bit, you can see right here, and they're just starting to look a little bit bedraggled, I would guess is a sign that they're probably starting to send their energy down into the potatoes and produce actual potato tubers. Now they did flower a few weeks ago, so I know usually after flowering it's a few weeks till you can start harvesting new potatoes, which you know, the tiny little potatoes, which are so delicious. I think for these potatoes I'm going to hold off and try to harvest at least most of them as full-size potatoes, but I don't think it'll be too long. So what I need to do is start thinking about what I'm going to do in this bed here once I harvest the potatoes. For at least most of the plants, I'm going to wait for the foliage to die back completely. As I said, if you want new potatoes, you can harvest a little bit earlier than that. But if you want the maximum yield in the full-size potatoes, you want to wait for this foliage to die back completely. So once it does die back, I'm thinking what I might end up doing is possibly transplanting out some of those tomato suckers here. You saw the tomato suckers that I was rooting from my existing plants. So I may end up amending this bed with compost just to kind of replenish the nutrients that the potatoes have used to grow, and then maybe grow some tomato suckers out here. So we'll see what happens. I think it kind of partly depends on how long the potatoes take to die back and when this bed actually becomes available. If it doesn't seem like it's enough time for the tomatoes to really yield, I might do something quicker like lettuce or bush beans or something like that. So if you have any suggestions, definitely let me know, because I'm not going to let this bed stay empty. It definitely needs to get used for something. So over here, you can see my crazy hodgepodge bed is, unsurprisingly, looking kind of crazy. Now you may remember that I had some chickweed and clover that sprang up in this bed, and I just let them grow because I wanted it to act as a living mulch. Well, the chickweed was starting to get really large, and I decided it was time to pull it up, let it dry in this bed, and just really act as a more traditional mulch. So I have done that with chickweed in the past, where I let it grow and then eventually pull it up and let it dry, and it almost works as sort of like a straw mulch. That way it will decompose, and all the nutrients in the chickweed will go back into your garden bed to feed your garden plants. That's the idea anyway. So I pulled up a lot of it on this side of the bed. I'm letting it kind of dry and just release its nutrients back into the garden bed. Now the clover is actually a nitrogen fixer. It works kind of similarly to plants like peas and beans, where it takes nitrogen from the air and basically puts it into the soil. So by letting the clover grow in this bed here, I'm actually enriching the soil, as long as it doesn't grow to the point where it gets too large and it's interfering with the growth of my desired plants here. I think I'm going to let that grow a little bit longer. And I still need to pull up the chickweed from the far half of the bed there. Now, I say I've done that before with chickweed, and it does work pretty well. I think the key is to harvest it a little earlier than I did, because I let it grow to the point where it really got entangled with a lot of my other plants, making it a lot more work to pull up and let dry. So, you know, it's a way to get free mulch and add a little bit of nutrients to your soil. It's also a little bit of work. So it's just what I decided to do in this situation here. Now, at the base of the trellis here, I did plant some winter squash seedlings. I was having trouble getting it to germinate and grow planted directly in the ground. So I actually started these inside in a moist paper towel inside a baggie. Then I transplanted them out into pots and put them out here. So I've got 2 butternut squash, and then at the far end there's 2 honey nut squash. So those should, in theory, climb up this trellis and make a beautiful arch. And you can see one poking out of the edge of the potato bed there. I actually have those same plants right along the edge of the potato bed, but they're a little bit smaller. So right now they're getting shaded by the potatoes, but once they grow, they should grow up the arch, and then they should be able to get plenty of sun that way. So back to this bed here. You can see I've got some Swiss chard growing. I've got carrots mixed in, some calendula, chamomile here, which doesn't look like much. I just came out and harvested a lot off of that yesterday. Got 1 cherry tomato plant back there. I've got lots of bush beans mixed in. So you can see the chickweed is still growing really lush all through here. I mentioned I pulled it out on the other side. I haven't done this side yet. And then on the corners of the beds, I've got sugar pie pumpkins, which should in theory vine out over the walkway and hopefully give me some good pumpkin yield. Got a borage plant here getting ready to flower, so that's really exciting. See, I did mention that bed was a little bit of a hodgepodge, and there's kind of a little bit of everything going on in that bed there. So we'll just kind of let that bed grow, see what it does, and see what we get out of it. So along the fence here, most of my cucumbers that were dug up did not make it. I have this one here that looks really good. That's a homemade pickles. There's one next to it here that's struggling a little bit, but I think ultimately might be okay. I did transplant out another silver slicer there, and then down there between my lemon balm, there's a butternut squash. So I'm hoping that I'll still be able to make use of this fence, even though really I only have 1 decent cucumber plant here right now. Although the one that I have looks beautiful, so hopefully that continues to do well. So I was originally planning to include the container garden that I have on my deck in this video, but I think this video is getting a little bit long. So I think what I'm actually going to do is make that its own separate video. So there'll be this main garden tour video, and then I'll have a little mini garden tour just of what I'm growing in containers on my deck. So that'll probably be the next video after this one. So thank you guys so much for joining me on this beautiful morning in my garden. I hope that you're having a wonderful day. I hope that your gardens are beautiful and abundant, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.